Hey guys, there has been a lot of talk lately in the true crime community on social media, making it sound as if all it takes to become a quote unquote victim advocate, which by the way is not the term that true advocates use anymore, that to become a quote unquote victim advocate, that all one needs to do is to claim that at some point in their life that they were a victim too. That isn't how it works, you guys. That is not at all how it works in real life. So I just want to caution you to be wary of those on social media who are clearly misusing the term advocate. If one of the self-anointed quote unquote victim advocates are offering to help you, I say put on your Nikes and run. And I'll explain why. When a person truly has been victimized, when they truly have experienced trauma firsthand, there are many factors, of course, which contribute to the person's ability to effectively cope post-trauma. Number one, what was and what is the victim's interpretation of the traumatic incident? Number two, what was and what is the person's ability to cope with a traumatic incident? And number three, and this is a partial list, let me tell you. Number three, what was and what is the person's ability to, I guess in layman's terms, the person's ability to move on with their life. Number one, what was and what is the victim's interpretation of the traumatic incident? Well, did the victim know the perpetrator? Did the victim trust the perpetrator? Did the victim know that the abuse was wrong? Did the victim know that it was safe to tell? Was it safe to tell? Did the victim fight back? Did the victim experience feelings of guilt or shame if they chose to not fight back? Did the victim feel shame or guilt or remorse for believing they somehow caused the abuse to happen? Was the victim groomed over time to believe that they should feel shame or guilt or remorse? That they should believe that somehow they caused the abuse to happen to them? All of these factors, and like I said, many more, affect not only the person's interpretation of the traumatic incident itself, but also the person's ability to effectively process the experience, which then opens the door for the person to effectively cope with the traumatic experience. Which brings us to number two, what is and what was the person's ability to cope with the traumatic incident? And as with number one, there are many important factors to consider when You're trying to help a person who has experienced a significant traumatic incident in their lives. I think one of the most important factors is resilience, the issue of resilience, because resilience matters. In fact, I could do an entire series of videos on the issue of resilience alone. And as a subcategory, there are many factors related to resilience that matter. And again, this is only a partial list. There's so much more to this than what the self-proclaimed victim advocates evidently want you to think. Patterns of behavior, both role modeled before the traumatic incident and post-trauma too. Personal patterns of behavior also, such as drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and the basic needs like sleeping patterns, eating habits, that sort of thing. And also established patterns specific to coping with everyday stressors. What kind of networks do the victims have in place at the time of the traumatic experience? Because networks matter to resilience. The friends and family members, are they enablers? Are they caring? Are they informed? Or are they oblivious to the specific needs of a trauma survivor? Like I said, the issue of resilience could fill a series of videos on this one topic alone. But a person's ability to cope relies on so much more than resilience alone. If the person seeking help finds that they like the attention, will that prolong the process of learning to cope with the trauma? Is the person feeling shame or guilt and maybe actually attempting to deflect that shame or guilt unfairly onto others? Is the person an honest person to begin with? Or are they a liar? Does the person struggle with the truth? Both before the trauma occurred, and then, of course, is the person still struggling with being able to be truthful post-trauma? Did the person have a good job? Was the person someone known to set goals and to achieve goals pre-trauma? And then post-trauma, did those goals change? Or were they maybe pushed to the side while the person chose to begin self-identifying as a victim instead of choosing to become a survivor? Was the person already victimized previous to the traumatic incident? And if so, did the person receive help for the prior victimization? Is the person previous to the trauma already exhibiting signs of a personality disorder or of an addiction or of anger management issues? Is the person predisposed to learned helplessness? Is the person predisposed to denying any culpability whatsoever and the choices they've made in their lives? Both pre and post the traumatic incident. There are so many more factors to consider, of course, in determining a person's ability to cope. But let's go ahead and move on to number 3, the ability to move on with their lives. In my opinion, survivors of trauma will likely, in the future, either be abused or they will become abusers themselves. Because in my opinion, abusers are made. They're not born. You know, it's the centuries-old debate of nature v. nurture, right? And, you know, this is overall. This isn't everybody, but overall, in my opinion, abusers were abused themselves. Abusers at some point in their lives were once victims. True advocates know that when a person has been traumatized, when a person has been harmed, when a person has suffered a traumatic incident in their life, that it is highly likely, if they do not receive proper help, that one of two things is bound to occur, like I said, that they will fall victim to abuse or they will abuse others. Tragically, it is too often that the victims do become abusers themselves. And in my opinion, that is exactly what we are witnessing lately in the true crime community on YouTube. In the little drama corner of the true crime community on YouTube, and a little bit on Facebook too, it appears that the self-proclaimed victims who have become self-proclaimed victim advocates have actually become abusers who are gathering together to abuse innocent people online. They call themselves advocates while they seek out, attack, and create victims of their own. Without help, victims become abusers who lie. Without help, victims become abusers who bully, who stalk, who harass, who threaten others. Without help, victims become abusers, desperate for attention, desperate for approval, and desperate to belong. Without help, victims become abusers who harm innocent people by targeting those who they perceive to be weaker than the abusers themselves evidently still feel. When an abuser calls himself or calls herself an advocate, then proceeds to exhibit signs of abusing and taking advantage of others, it is clear to true advocates that the victims turned abusers are still in need of help. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in any way suggesting that we feel sorry for any victim who has chosen the path of becoming an abuser. I'm simply explaining what, in my opinion, has been happening in the true crime community. For over 12 years straight, I have written on cases of true crime specific to family violence. I have multiple true crime case discussion groups, which have been going strong for many years without any of the drama that we've seen happening on social media in the last 2 years, when suddenly many of us who have been admins of true crime case discussion groups or authors of books on true crime cases fell under attack. The attacks were planned. We were targeted. The attack campaigns were launched immediately following the case of Christopher Watts hitting the headline news. We were attacked by a gang of scumbag thugs who call themselves quote-unquote victim advocates. While it's clear by their own actions that they're not advocates at all. In my opinion, there's no doubt about it. They're abusers. That at some point in their lives may have experienced abuse. But instead of getting the help they seem to still so obviously need, they chose instead to become abusers. And you know the old saying, hurt people hurt people. Well, the abusers who call themselves advocates in the true crime community on YouTube, as disgusting and as despicable as they are, the abusers are, in my opinion, hurt people who are hurting people. They are hurt people who evidently never got the help they needed. So they band together in that little corner in the true crime community, perhaps hoping to be heard. If they weren't heard when at some point in their lives they may have cried out for help. They are hurt people who evidently never got the help they needed, so they band together in that little corner in the true crime community, perhaps hoping to be believed. If perhaps they weren't believed when they dared to tell. They are hurt people banding together in that little corner, perhaps hoping to somehow heal without any clue how. Perhaps they're hoping to take control since they still suffer from losing control when they experienced trauma. Perhaps they're hoping to find power since they had none at the time of whatever traumatic event or incident they experienced. Perhaps they're hoping to belong, even though the groups and the gangs they are choosing to belong to are chock full of hurting people just like them. Hurting people who are hurting people. And in my opinion, that's exactly what the self-proclaimed quote-unquote victim advocates have become. If you have been victimized, please get the help you need. Because until you do, then you are at risk. Not only of being victimized again, but more likely of becoming an abuser yourself.